I'm 29 and I live along the Appalachian Range in lower West Virginia. I've been going backpacking and camping for years, exploring different trails all around the nearby mountains. My best friend, who lives just a few miles from me, would often join me on these hikes. We usually planned one big trail every year in the fall, lasting anywhere from few days to a whole week of backpacking and camping. In 2019, we planned to take a trail across the range to a small lake at the top of the mountains. However, in the days leading up to the trip, my friend had to call it off because of an emergency at his work. I had already taken the whole week off of work and had everything ready to go, so I decided to just go alone. On Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead and then started my route. This wasn't a regular recreational trail you could typically see on a 4-hour hike. These backpacking trails didn't have a defined path, so you have to use maps, compasses, and landmarks to navigate where you're going. Typically, there's a large landmark in the distance, like a specific rock formation that you hike toward, and when you get there, you could see your next landmark and so on. I spent the first 2 days hiking towards the ridge in the mountains. When it got dark on the second day, I set up camp several hours from reaching the ridge. I pitched tent and got a fire going on. Then heated up some of my food I brought in my bag. The sun had already set, and it was around 8 o'clock when I laid in my tent to rest and read. I left the fire going, planning to put it out before actually sleeping. 20 minutes into reading, and through the fire crackling outside, I heard the strong sound of a stick snapping right behind my tent. I jolted up, my first thought being a black bear possibly having smelled the food I cooked earlier. I didn't hear anything else though. I crawled out of the tent and shined a flashlight in the tree line behind my tent. Nothing. I called out aggressively to scare away any predators, but again, there were no sound of anything running away. It was really strange, because the sticky snapping was very distinct, definitely being from something I stepped on it. I stayed outside of the tent for a while, looking around constantly before putting out the fire and going inside. I found it really hard to sleep that night because I was so focused on listening for more sounds. In the morning, I was almost surprised to have even slept through the night. I packed my tent and everything else from the campsite, then continued along until I reached the ridge. From there, it was a straight shot to the lake. I was moving fast, trying to get there before dark, so I wouldn't have to move my campsite again the next day. I arrived with about an hour to spare before sunset. The lake was beautiful, very much worth the hike. I walked around it, enjoying the scenery, and pitched a tent and set up my camp on the tree lines beside the lake. As I sat by the fire, I kept turning around, hearing soft noises somewhere between the trees behind me. I figured I was just being paranoid, but it was really creepy. It almost sounded exactly like footsteps, but I knew nobody would be out there. I would have seen their tent when I walked around the lake. It was too dark at this point to see anything further than a few feet, so looking around wasn't an option anymore. An hour later, I got in my tent and laid down. Every few minutes, I would hear footsteps again. They were barely too quiet for me to tell for sure what they were though. Eventually, I got so tired that I fell asleep. What I think was only an hour after I fell asleep, I woke up to the sound of someone running away from my tent. I jolted up. I grabbed my flashlight, rushing out of the tent and looking in the direction of footsteps. I saw bareback of them running away in the distance. I've always loved camping, especially in the fall when the leaves change colors and the air is crisp. So when my best friend, whom I call Sarah, invited me to go camping with her for her birthday, I eagerly accepted. We packed our gear and headed out to a secluded spot in the woods that Sarah's family has frequented for years. As we hiked in, I felt the peaceful silence, the kind that makes you feel like you are the only two people in the world. The hike was relatively short, and when we arrived at the campsite, we immediately started setting up. It only took about an hour, and after we finished, we decided to go for a hike. We ventured pretty much straight north, off the beaten path, just exploring until we stumbled upon a faded out trail. Sarah had never seen it before and it was puzzled because she thought she knew the area well. She followed the trail which wound through the woods and eventually led us to what appeared to be an old, abandoned cabin. It was small, weather beaten, with a broken window and a sagging roof. Sarah was eager to explore it, while I was hesitant but also curious. We stepped inside and it was evident that no one had been there for years, poked around looking for any interesting artifacts or clues about who might have lived here, but found nothing. Just as we were about to leave, I noticed something strange. A door in the corner of the cabin that I hadn't seen before. It was very small and had a padlock on it. I pointed it out to Sarah, and we both became intrigued. The lock looked really old, completely rotted over. I knocked on the door just to be sure no one was inside, but it was silent. Sarah went outside and grabbed a large rock, handing it to me. I smashed the rock against the log, and after a few good hits, it broke open. The door dragged against the ground as I pulled it back, revealing pitch blackness inside. Sarah pointed her flashlight through the doorway, and we saw a staircase leading down. We were both creeped out, but assured ourselves that nobody had been there for years, and that there was nothing to fear. I led the way down the steep staircase, which was only about 8 to 10 steps, and it opened into a room. What we saw was disturbing and strange. There were several star mattresses on the ground, along with other random furniture. The mattresses looked modern, like they were only a few years old. Something about it filled me with fear, and both of us rushed back upstairs, shutting the door behind us. We stood there, unsure of what we had just seen. We debated whatever it was a crime scene of some sort of. We debated whatever it was a crime scene or some sort of, because it was seemed so out of place. As I was talking, Sarah suddenly touched me. In the distance, we heard footsteps coming towards the cabin. They came all the way up to it, but oddly walked right past it without stopping. I could see the confusion on Sarah's face too. As soon as footsteps were far enough away, we ran back to our campsite, packed up quickly, and headed straight to Sarah's place. We called the police just in case it was something serious. The police searched the cabin and surrounding area, but ultimately found nothing. They said it was strange and seemed like something bad might happen, but there was no evidence to confirm that. It ended up becoming a big topic in our town, with the community speculating about every possibility and theory of what the cabin was used for. The city even had the cabin torn down to prevent people from visiting it. The mystery has never been solved, and probably never will be, but I can't shake the feeling that something awful happened there. Every year as a kid, my family would go on these big camping trips. I was always really excited because we lived in Arizona, when there's pretty much nothing, and with camping Washington, seeing trees and grasses was my favorite part. But I also got to see all my cousins. Even though we only saw each other a couple of times a year, we were really close. My favorite cousin, who was more like a brother to me, was Louis. He was a year older than me, and we were inseparable when together. Because of what happened, we even became closer after that camping trip. I think it took us both a while to understand what really went on and what more could have happened to us. I started when we had been there for 2 days already. Most of our family was either in the lake or by the campfire talking. Louis didn't like to swim, so we decided to play in the woods instead. We played a version of tag called Bandit, we'd switch off being cop and the chase the other one, who was the bandit, until we caught him. We could play for hours, but in the woods, it's easy to just keep running and not know where you're going. We tried our best to stay within the view, but when Louis started chasing me with a huge stick, I guess my adrenaline kicked in to hyper speed. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I ended up at an old looking trailer. Louis wasn't far behind, but I remember him throwing their stick down. His focus now on what we have both assumed was an abandoned trailer. We discussed investigating it further, but I'm not really sure why. But we decided not to. We started walking back, but we didn't really know where we were going. Probably about 10 minutes into our walk, we saw a couple coming towards us, pushing a shopping cart full of stuff. The woman approached us and was really nice. While the man stayed back, she asked if we were lost, who we were with, our names and ages. I remember when we told her how old we were, she looked back at the guy and then to us again. She told us we didn't have to be scared and she'd help us find our way home after they dropped off their stuff at their campsite. She said we could also make s'mores if we wanted. Louis and I were hesitated, but she seemed real nice. And it was still daytime, so for some reasons that made everything way less suspicious in my 7-year-old brain, bad people only do things at night, so we were fine. We walked with them for a while, following them back to their camp. While she and Louis were talking, I glanced over at the shopping cart. It was filled with a bunch of rusty metal things and what looked like nothing new. Nothing was in the bags, everything just looked like trash they found. I started to get really uncomfortable, and I could tell Louis was too. Every time I looked over at the guy, he was never smiling, and sometimes he'd be staring at me with a blank stare. This was 80 years ago, and I still remember how creepy he looked. Walked a bit further until the trailer come back into view, and the woman grabbed his Louis' hands and asked if we were excited for s'mores. Suddenly, I heard Louis's name being called and then mine. We all stopped for a second, and the lady squeezed my hand a bit tighter. She asked something to the guy along the lines of what they should do. He responded, but I don't remember what he said. The lady started to turn us toward the trailer while holding us tighter and tighter. She started to speed up as well, into sort of a fast walk. I looked back and saw my sister through the trees. Without hesitation, I yelled for her name, and the lady immediately let go of my hand. Louis and I ran to her as she made her way towards us. My sister yelled to the others that she'd found us. My mom and dad thanked the couple who had told them this elaborate story on how they'd been trying to find our parents for a while now, and that we were such sweet boys and everything. I remembered my parents inviting the couple over for burgers, but thankfully they declined. I think because the lady was so nice and that we were found safe, my parents didn't think twice. I do recall my dad and uncle talking about how creepy the guy was though. My cousin and I ended up telling my sister who found us that the couple was weird, but I don't think she understood what we meant. It wasn't until my cousin and I were old enough to understand that some people have really bad intentions. We talked about it later in depth, and we both become conclusive that by the looks of it they were tight on money and were probably going to sell us for something. For years growing up, I had kept this from my parents because I supposed to be the strong man of the family, and thinking about that time made me feel gross and preyed upon. Lois also felt embarrassed as he was older than me, and felt he had to fail to protect me. We eventually told our parents a few years ago, but I wish we had told them immediately, and maybe something could have been done. Nowadays, I've never let my kids out of sight, and others let them know, and they can tell me everything, without a fear of being judged, especially my son.